Yeah, I welcome. Let's take a look at a piece of legislation now that's it's been in the news massively, and you probably had emails through from various people saying, due to the latest, we'd like to make sure you'd like to stay in our database, and everyone's getting really nervous about data, aren't they? The Cambridge Analytica business going on, really, Facebook, Twitter, they're all worried about data now and privacy and everything. I guess Facebook, Google, Twitter, they got away with murder really with the data. Remember, of course, with Facebook, you are the product. A lot of people appreciate that as well. So that's why I've come off Facebook, come off Twitter now, because there's no value really anymore moving forward. Anyway, let's go on to the topic, which is bang into the exam for this year, and you'll get a couple of questions on this one, and that's the GDPR. GDPR. Now, it's the General Data Protection Regulation. You probably don't ever get a question what does it stand for, so I'll just keep GDPR up there for you. As you can appreciate, of course, we've had legislation for data protection for a long old time. We've had it since 1998. The first Data Protection Act came out, which governed data that companies hold on you. So the whole point is it applies to personal data that is held on you in companies, databases, servers, etc. It's not just data; it's also paper as well. But nobody keeps paper anymore, do they? So what we're talking about here then, the revisions of GDPR. It came in May 2018. So let's just put it out there for you. So whenever you're watching this video, that might be now or might be in the past, and it applies to personal data, both automated personal data and to manual records. That's really important. So we're talking here about personal data that's held in a company's systems about you. Now, I talk about Facebook, of course, massive amount of data they've got. They advertise using that data. Google's probably got more data than anybody else in this world. Amazon's got tons. Tesco's got tons. Every company you deal with will keep some of your data as well, and they'll deal with it. And the whole point is this Act wants to give you more protection for that data, make it more private. We've heard all sorts of hacking scandals coming in, haven't we? Now, there's a number of principles that the Act brings in. The old Data Protection Act did the same thing. Now, there's 6 principles that you'll need to be aware of. So I'm going to sneak those over here, really, because these are the kind of things in which you'll get questions on. 6 principles of GDPR. The first one is that all of your data must be processed lawfully. Yeah, lawfully, fairly, and transparently. So when it gets processed, it's got to be within the law. Makes total sense, really, at the end of the day. Now, it's got to be collected for some kind of legitimate process, a legitimate reason. So a specified reason, legitimate reason. So for example, when you log on to our website and you put your email address in there, we send you CeMAP questions every day, whatever. And we keep your email address and we keep your first name on our database, which is held securely. Now we keep that because legitimately we're going to email you a question, a CeMAP question, on a regular basis. That's all we hold. Number 3 is the data that's held must be adequate. There we are. And relevant and limited to what's necessary. So I joked there really, we hold your first name and your email address. We don't need anything else. We don't need your physical address, we don't need your surname, we don't need your date of birth, we don't need your phone number, so we don't keep it. So it's kept adequate really. Number 4 is you must keep it accurate as well. They should call it cleaning your database, didn't they? And again, with our database, we've got about 5,500 people on our database that we email out on a regular basis. And MailChimp, who we use, are very clever because they clean it for you. If there's a bounce, email sent to you and it bounces back, then they remove that from the system. There's no debate, it just goes. So we're always cleaning our database as we go along. And if somebody doesn't respond to any of our emails for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, we just take them off. And obviously we have the unsubscribe as well, so people can unsubscribe when they want to. No big deal. Number 5 is you mustn't keep it for longer than necessary. Kept no longer than is necessary, which makes sense really. And number 6, it must be processed that ensures security. So it must be secure. And they're the 6 main principles of GDPR. Not a lot different really to the old Data Protection Act, which had 8 principles, but there we are. That's just the way it works, isn't it? So they make sense. Make sure you remember those. You might want a little acronym or something. You might want to make up a word for all of those. It would be quite useful to do that. So let's take a look at some more GDPR then, and take a look at what happens to companies that hold data and what affects them. Because there's a lot of different people involved that you need to be aware of their names or their titles. So we've got a few principles really, or titles. A different sort of pen here for you. We squeeze it over here then, we've got people that we're talking about now under GDPR. Now the first person that we talked about is the data subject. Now when I put a bit of emphasis on these, because in the CeMAP exam it'll use the phrase data subject, and you've got to appreciate that that's the person who has data. So let's just take an example of me and Tesco's. Now I've been shopping with Tesco's with their club card since like ever, and I have my current account with Tesco's, and I buy a lot of stuff from them, so they've got an awful lot of information about me. You know, they've got current account details, they've got all my shopping for the last 25 years. Now I am known as the data subject. Now within Tesco's systems there is personal data. Now personal data, as the name suggests, is my data, so that's actually personal data there. So my name, my address, my details, my shopping preferences, it's all there, and an awful lot of data going on there as well. Within that you might have sensitive data. Now sensitive data is a particularly useful one to categorise, because this looks at data that is sensitive. So, you know, something like about your race, your politics, your religion. You know, did I vote for the Conservatives or Labour? You know, that kind of stuff is kept by some companies. Facebook will have all of that, of course, which is all the hoo-ha about elections being rigged. This is sensitive data, and companies must really make sure that they process this with specific consent if they've got sensitive data in the systems. There's this thing called the data controller. It sounds like remember the TV program with the trains, the Fat Controller? It was the data controller's the one that's saying the Thomas the Tank Engine. I remember that. So the data controller is the purpose, is who determines the purposes of the data that's, because you've got data controller, data processor. So the data controller is the person in the company that runs the show really, that determines what data is used for. And the data processor is the person who processes the data on behalf of the data controller. So it's a bit of a long-winded way, isn't it? So the data controller is probably the boss of the company who determines what the data is going to be used for, and the data processor is the person that processes the data for that respect. So, you know, nothing really fancy really when it comes to that one. That's the people involved in the process itself. Makes sense so far? Quite a lot going on here. You can see kind of questions that you might get in the exam. Now there are some requirements then for processing the data. So when it comes to processing, get a different colour pen here. We're talking about the data processor and the data controller. There's some requirements. So I'm going to squeeze those in here. Yeah, requirements. This is now the requirements of the Act that they have to adhere to. Well, first of all, when processing data, at least one of the following must apply when processing personal data. So first of all, have you got clear consent from the person to process data? Now, of course, on my systems, people come on, they put their email address and their name, and they give me permission. So it's clear consent, isn't it? Which is why a lot of companies now are writing to you or emailing you saying, would you please consent to us keeping your data on our systems? There may be a contract involved. So, for example, if I had a personal loan with a bank and I signed a contract, in that contract it will probably say something like, you know, we have to keep your data for the term of the loan. And that's fine as well. There might be some sort of legal obligation. So let's take a look at motor cars, the tax of a car. You have to keep your car taxed, and therefore the DVLA keep details, personal data about you, because it's a legal obligation. Fair play. It might be in some sort of vital interest. So, you know, I donate blood and plasma and stuff, and therefore I'm on the database of the blood people, whatever they're called. And that's a kind of vital thing. I think that's a reason why they keep my data. It could be in the interests of the public good. Therefore, the police force keeps all sorts of databases about people who've done naughty things in the past. Therefore, that's for the public good. That's a good example of that one, isn't it? Or it could just be for legitimate interests, that the firm will keep your data because of legitimate interests. It's the processing that's necessary for the organisation's legitimate interests, really. And that's fair enough, really. At the end of the day, the big one is this one here, the consent. So let's just put that one there. That's what all the hoo-ha recently is about. Privacy, all your data, you give them consent to keep it, and that's why everyone's emailing you everything recently as well. So once all this gets going then, what rights then does the data subject have? So we've got here this character here, the data subject. That's you and I. The idea is what rights they have. So let's just squeeze it around there. Now they've got a lot of rights, and that's the whole point behind it really. The first right that they've got is they have the ability to access the personal data that's held. So there's your personal data. They have the ability to have a look at that to see what's held, which is great. They've had that ability anyway for donkey's years. Once they're in there, they can have the ability to correct the data, and they can have it erased as well in certain circumstances, or they can move it from one provider to another. Let's give you some examples of that one. So first of all, they can access personal data. Now, I had a chap a couple of years ago now, when was it? 2009, did a webinar on the subject of hypnotic selling techniques, which was great. And I put a blog post on my blog, inviting people to attend the webinar. And this chap attended it, and he put a comment afterwards, which people do, saying, great webinar, really looking forward to using hypnotic selling techniques with clients. And a few years later, about 4 or 5 years later, he emailed me, he said, look, Paul, he said, I've got a bit of a problem here. He said, I'm trying to apply for this job, a really fancy city job. And if you Google my name, that blog posting comes up. My comment comes up. And I don't really want my company that I'm going to work for knowing that I'm up with hypnotic selling techniques. It doesn't work with the company. So he had the right, therefore, to access the data that was held. Now, I guess I held that on a blog, which was held in WordPress. So I had the ability to show him the data. He had the ability to correct it, but it wasn't wrong. But then he had the ability to erase it. It's called the right to be forgotten, isn't it? And I said, yeah, no problem, I'll delete it for you. And I deleted it and it was erased. The right to be forgotten. A lot of people are doing this, aren't they? The fourth right they have is to move the data from one service provider to another. And you might not think that's pretty important, but it is, because a lot of banks now, open banking they call it, are allowing you to move your bank account obviously to another company. But now you can move the data from one bank to a separate app now. Open banking allows you to do that. There's an app now you can get which links into your current account, and when you buy your Starbucks, for example, your latte, and it costs £2.60, that's Cheltenham. That's not Cheltenham prices, about £5. Then the 40 pence change, to round up the figure, would go into a separate bank account. The app collects these pennies and basically accrues. It's quite clever actually. So at the end of the year, you'll have a couple £100 saved up for your Christmas. Now they have to feed the data. The data can be moved from one provider to another. That's the whole point behind it. So they're the rights then that the individual has. And think about it, that makes total sense. That's not new really at the end of the day. It's just been cleaned up really. The whole point, of course, about GDPR is it's an EU legislation, and any EU citizen that has data held anywhere in the world is covered by this. So let's take a look at compliance then with GDPR. Now once you've got the data controller here, this particular individual, let's get a red pen here for you, the data controller, who's pretty much in control of everything really, this person or company needs to comply. Let's get a black pen there for you. They need to comply with the Act. Of course they do. Some of the things they have to do. First of all, they have to establish governance structure, roles and responsibilities for the business that they run. Of course they do. Then they have to have a detailed record of all data processing operations. So they've got to have a record, details about all the data processing they do. Then they have to document data protection policies and procedures. So they pretty much got to have let's squeeze it here for you, a policy. And you see this in websites now where they have their privacy policy. And we've got one on our website. You go on there, it tells you what we do with data. And these have got to be available for people to see, and you've got to have strict policies and procedures based around that. And they have to carry out impact assessments on anything that's high risk. So the Facebooks, of course, would have to do that as well. And we're talking here about hacking, the security side of things. And we've got here secure. That's the big one, which a lot of companies, of course, are spending a lot of money on. Now, they must make sure that they keep it secure and prevent any hacking. If hacking occurs, you've got to let the data processor know, the information commissioner know very quickly. And that's the issue, because people keep data now in the cloud, don't they? They don't have it on hard drives anymore. And of course, websites get into the cloud. You can hack all the data behind the website. So it's got to be really, really secure. So that's pretty much complying with the GDPR. It's about having structure. It's about having records and policies and procedures. So what does it cover? I mentioned that already, the scope of it. Well, first of all, the Information Commissioner here in the UK is responsible for GDPR. The Information Commissioner, you might have seen her on telly recently, she is responsible for this one. There you go. Commissioner. And wherever you are in the world, the organisation responsible for data is the one that's responsible for GDPR. So it's the lead authority for data protection in the country that you're involved in. Will, obviously oversee, make sure it's all done properly. It covers all goods and services up to EU consumers. So we mentioned to you that it's European Union citizens. And of course, we keep our data all around the world, don't we? So the UK Information Commissioner will be responsible for GDPR here in the UK. Makes total sense, really. Now this then comes down to the clever part, really, because they've got an awful lot of powers now. They can enforce this, and they will do. They can require organisations to provide information. They can conduct compulsory audits as well. They can commit an organisation to improve its compliance. They can serve stop now notices, stop trading until we sort this out. And they, of course, can serve monetary penalties, which we'll talk about in a moment or two. So the Information Commissioner then can really make sure that the company complies. And they have the rights to go and talk to the data controllers and get things sorted. Now, you might have read about the Cambridge Analytica, all the hoo-ha about the Facebook app that was created and all those people's privacy rights. Now, the Information Commissioner the following day just waltzed in with their FBI-type jackets, didn't they? And they shut them down pretty much until they demanded they have a look at all the data, they access it, see what they're doing. They wanted proper information, want audits, a temporary ban on it. And Cambridge Analytica has gone bust because they didn't have a business model anymore. Ultimately, of course, they can fine these companies if they don't do the things right they're supposed to do. They can fine them, and they can fine them up to 20 million euros or 4% of the turnover, whichever is the bigger figure. That's a massive amount of money for some of these big concerns. Can you imagine Facebook or Google being fined 4% of their turnover? Massive amount of money. I can see it happening as well. It'd be fun, wouldn't it? The European Union got it up against Google, haven't they, and Facebook. So there we have GDPR and some of the enforcement as well. Massive piece of legislation, as you can appreciate. It's a chapter in the book. You'll get a couple of questions on it, probably on the requirements or the rights that people have, or the principles, or it could just be a simple one on the money that you have to pay. It's in to stay, it won't go away. It's a huge piece of legislation. Hope that's all been quite useful for you.